Hello everybody and welcome to the LPL Recap. My name is Munchables, and with the LPL 7-day schedule, games are coming at you thick and fast, so I'm here to get you up to speed on what's been happening during week 2 and 3 in some of the most exciting and important matches in our standings. So let's take a look at what we're going through here today. Starting off with RNG versus LNG, we'll go over Top versus JDG, BOG versus E-Star, RNG versus JDG, and finally FPX versus WE. But don't forget to check out the honorable mentions that you can see on your screen there as well, because those were matches that you need to get up to speed on. Go check out the highlights. I just don't have time to go through every single series I want to here today. But with that said, let's get to our first series. In our series between RNG and LNG, LNG came out with a completely unexpected upset over the favorites of RNG in the second week of the LPL. Bear in mind, RNG was still undefeated at this point for this split, and LNG was certainly coming in as the underdogs. But when we got into the game, especially game number 1, this felt like a grand final. There was a total of 3 Elder Dragons taken and 4 Barons taken across the game. And honestly, you've got to keep your eyes on Light in this series, because despite being the new kid on the block, he stepped up, especially on this Ezreal, to really do work in the late game teamfights. You could see RNG actually got the Elder Dragon there, but it wasn't enough for them to win the fight. And Xiaolong Bao, huge props for this attempt, but Light had the damage to shut him down. Ming comes in at the last second as well to try and snag this Baron. He was 25 HP away from stealing it, but at the end of the day, LNG continued to build their lead. Light gets the final hit on that last Elder Dragon, and then this fight goes the way of LNG. This sets them up to win the entire game. Xiaohu turns golden at the last second, but it's not quite enough to keep him safe from the Elder buff with Light's final snipe. Then we just had one last 3v3. Light barely survives thanks to the healing coming out from Duan on the Yuumi, and with that, it was going to be game number 1 going the way of LNG. A convincing win over RNG. Game number 2, a little bit less exciting though from the side of RNG. It felt like they'd really put everything into game number 1, and LNG with an early lead with Light on Aphelios. You could see the scoreboard 3-0-2 as well. He was able to snowball this one. They were able to get themselves a Mountain Soul, and we all know what happens when Mountain Soul is taken. There's not a whole lot you can do to kill those carries anymore, so Light was able to run away with things. Maple on the Azir as well looked fantastic, and LNG went 2-0 over RNG. Let's take a bit of a look back over our rematch of the Spring 2020 finals. We saw JDG and Top Esports butting heads last week as they went into their best of 3. Bear in mind, both teams 1-0 starting this series off, but Top Esports coming in off of an international win at the MSC finals, whereas JDG looking a little bit shakier than what we're used to. And we saw this all kick off right at the very start of the game. Karsa barely surviving this fight thanks to the smite onto the Scuttle Crab, and Kanavi got so unlucky. Karsa barely survives as 369 is able to shut down Kanavi, able to get himself some early gold on a Kayle. You can probably see where I'm going with this one, because we've got a Kayle with an early kill there. This next team fight, 369 was able to get even more kills behind him, and suddenly you look at this composition from Top Esports, there's a whole bunch of scaling with a Kai'Sa and a Kayle, and JDG were unable to win out any of these early fights. Suddenly you find yourself at a 5k gold deficit, and suddenly Top Esports are well and truly in control. Jackie found himself another double kill, and then with that Baron buff, there was nothing JDG could do to hold off the push here. You can see a 24-minute victory for Top Esports. Game number 2, JDG tried to be a little bit more proactive, but this invade that they went for was just too deep. JackieLove responded along with Knight and Yu Yanjia, and it meant that JackieLove managed to get himself a double kill early on in the game as an Ezreal with a pet Yuumi. That's a scary precedent to set. And then in this next fight, JDG tried to contest them a little bit more, but these chaotic fights are where Ezreal Yuumi excels. JackieLove finds himself a triple kill onto Yagao here, and suddenly things are looking real bad for JDG. This final fight, you can already see the scoreline, 10-1-2 for JackieLove, and he was able to comfortably sweep things up with his pet kitty cat on his shoulder. And honestly, the final note for this one, maybe don't give Jackie Love Ezreal, especially when Yuumi is available, because you know the top esports will not let you escape 2-0 in the end over JDG. BLG started off the split 0-2 as they went in towards this series against the crowd favorite of eStar, who were 1-1 on the scoreboard at the time. But right at the very start of the series, everything went wrong for eStar as Wei forgot to bring Smite as the jungler for eStar, and it meant that this game number 1 of the series, was utter chaos the entire time. If you want some highlights to watch over the weekend, this is the series for you, especially game number 1. But ultimately, it was BLG coming out on top of things. Later on into the game, they were able to find pick after pick onto eStar, who fell apart, and you could see Wings on the Aphelios. He got real fed towards the later stages, and there was nothing that Xiaoxi and Wing could do to shut them down. It meant that BLG found themselves the Baron and were able to waltz on in with a game 1 win. Later on into the series, though, game number 2, we saw Xiaoxi get his Blitzcrank, and we all know how good Xiaoxi is when he can find these hooks like that one onto Best. It set a Wink up then to get 2 early kills on this Ezreal. And we all know what happens when Ezreal gets a double kill early. Keep your eyes on Wink on this Ezreal during this fight, because he was able to do anything he wanted. Fofo tries to pressure him, but he can't. Wings is stuck out off to the side, and Wink able to just flash forward at the end, get an early kill on, or get a late kill onto Fofo in this fight, and able to snowball this lead into a win for eStar, evening out this series. And a lot of fans would have thought that that should have been the final fight of the series had they won game number 1. Then, game number 3, we saw BLG looking like the potential of BLG that everyone talks about. Every so often they have a perfect game, and this was exactly that. Fofo was able to get so fed on this LeBlanc, doing so much damage during these fights. There was no way in for the carries of eStar. And BLG, when they look like this, they look like a top team, and they were able to take the series in the end, 2-1 over eStar. In week number 3 of the LPL, we had a matchup between RNG and the spring champions of JDG, and honestly, nobody really knew what to expect coming into this series. RNG took it 2-1 in the end, after both of these teams have had up and down performances so far this split. RNG looking fantastic, but JDG, in game number 1 at least, looked like the spring champions once again. They were able to start things off strong with a lead on their Aphelios. Loken doing some excellent work during the fights, and Zoom as well on this Mordekaiser became practically invincible later on into the game. With this early lead that you can see though, they were able to find themselves a Cloud Soul and force RNG into a fight in the late game. There was nothing RNG could really do though. Betty too far behind on the Ashe. Xiaohu couldn't do enough, and you could see the amount of shurikens. We all know what happens in 200 years. But then, game number 2, we saw RNG come back with a vengeance, and look at Betty in this fight. Flashes over the wall and goes Assassin Kalista mode, getting himself a triple kill in this fight in the end and setting his team up for success. Then similar story in the late game fights up against JDG with 3 Infernal Drakes and an insane wombo combo with a Wukong and an Orianna. Betty was able to just dance around. Nothing Zoom could do to stop him doing whatever he wanted during these fights. It meant he was able to shut down the members of JDG and net RNG a team fight win, and off the back of that they were able to snowball. The new member up in the top lane for RNG decided it was his turn to shine with this 1v3 against JDG. Lumao doesn't let him escape, but it's much to Lumao's dismay because he immediately gets cut down and Nu walks away with it. In the meantime, the rest of his team is taking the rest of the map, and this was just a sheer snowball off the back of Nu's hard work. You see Betty popping off on the Kalista once again, and RNG, maybe they finally got over Uzi. Maybe this is the version of the roster that can look great in playoffs once again. FPX versus WE ended in a 2-1 victory for FPX, the current world champions. But if there is any series you need to watch the highlights for, it is this one, because this was utter chaos the entire time. We saw this first game actually started relatively slow, but it was all about FPX managing to get themselves an invincible Ornn in the top lane. Khan was practically indestructible, and off the back of lots of small fights like this, they were able to start getting objectives themselves. If you look at the gold and the kills, it was incredibly even at that point in the game, but that fight led to a Baron, and then FPX could set up yet another fight, finding a pick onto Missing to start this fight off. Teachama desperately trying to save his teammates, but ultimately he went down, and then that fight led to a snowball that led to the end of the game. Game 2, though, everything looked terrible for WE until Jomon got that arrow exactly, set up an insane wombo combo, and look at the gold. They were still behind after this fight was done, but WE could find a Baron off the back of this fight and find a way back into the game. Khan was on this Kale. He was starting to get some items, but it wasn't enough, and you can see this late game team fight with 3 Mountain Drakes with the Mountain Soul. WE became basically invincible at this stage. Morgan jumped in on by Teachama, and suddenly everything fell apart for FPX in the late game. Then game number 3, everything looked pretty okay for both teams. We had 3 Drakes though for FPX after a very slow early game, and WE had to fight them for the 4th. They couldn't allow Soul to go on over, but they were too far behind, they were too weak, and couldn't take it on. With a Mountain Soul in the pockets though, FPX looked great coming into the fights. Morgan doing his best on the Wukong, but ultimately Khan on the Mordekaiser just took over everything, shuts down Jomon during the Death Realm, comes back out and just brings the smackdown onto the whole squad of WE. FPX finally are starting to look a little bit more like their 2019 form as they took a 2-1 victory. Week 2 and 3 really had some insane series. That's all we got time to recap though. Let's have a glance at where we stand at the end of all of that action. You can see Top Esports and LGD are right at the very top of the table. 3-0 right now and looking good. And across the board, there are some names that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be where they are. OMG yet to pick up a win this split, and E-Star without crying in the mid lane, 2-2 right in the center of the table. But we're only, 2.5 weeks in. There's still plenty of time to see what will shake up across the rest of the split. So with that, bringing our show to an end. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Munchables. I've been talking you through all of the action. And if you've been watching this on Twitch, make sure to check out the LPL YouTube channel. If you've been watching this on YouTube, however, make sure to check out the LPL Twitch channel because we're probably live right now. There are 7 days a week of LPL action, so make sure you're checking it out. That's going to be it from us. Make sure you tune in for the next episode of the LPL Recap.